Good evening all and welcome. As voted for by you, tonight I have a collection of creepy stories involving real people. And for those of you who've been asking, yes, if you would like your birthday shout out, please get it to me quickly this month. Join Patreon, send me a message, and give me your topic, because I'm planning all the topics for this month. So if you want your birthday shout out in October, you have got to get them to me quickly, guys. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My brother used to frequent a chain barbershop in our town. It was actually mainly marketed towards children, because you can play games while you wait for a haircut. The manager of the shop, Ray, was the best barber in town. All types of guys would go there to see him. Old men, middle-aged, didn't matter. No one cared the shop was mainly for kids because Ray was so good. The other barbers that worked there would sit around doing nothing because everyone wanted Ray. He was a very quiet man, very soft-spoken. We all considered him a close family friend of sorts. One day my brother walks into the shop and asks if Ray is around. There were two men at the counter, and both of them looked at each other and smiled weirdly. One of them spoke up and said, "Ray isn't in the country anymore." This didn't really surprise me because Ray wasn't originally from our country, so I figured maybe he'd gone abroad to visit family or something. Months went by, and Ray still wasn't around. I started getting a bad feeling in my stomach, even though it is common for people to stay with family while abroad for a while. When I went on the shop's Facebook page, it said Ray had died, and there was going to be a funeral downtown. I was floored. Some days went by and I decided to check the post and see if there were any comments. At first it was the normal, "Oh, my son loved him, rest in peace. Wow, I'm gonna miss him." One comment though stood out from the rest. There was a comment from a blank account that said something along the lines of, "He doesn't deserve to be missed because of what he did. He deserves to rot in hell." Like, whoa, where did this come from? So now I was really invested in finding out what happened. I know it's not really my business, but I was just so curious. Then I went into full-on stalker mode. I basically followed breadcrumbs around the internet, and after a long time I found his wife's name. I entered her maiden name last into Facebook and found her aunt's account. And on her aunt's account, there was a memorial post for Ray's wife on there. When I read the comments on the post, my blood ran cold. To sum it up, when Ray went back home to his country, he shot and killed his wife and then turned the gun on himself. I was absolutely horrified and very sad. They had 3 small children, and I thought about what they were going through. I cried a lot that night. I would have never guessed in 10,000 years that Ray would be capable of doing what he did. Now I'm somewhat paranoid when meeting new people, because that day I realized you never really know what's going on in someone's head, and to never judge a book by its cover. I was around 9 years old when this happened. My parents had been separated for about 2 years. Before I get to the main part of the story, there's some necessary context you need to understand. My mum, dad and I were always very poor. At the time, my parents were trying to build a house in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in our city, a place overrun by drug trafficking. But it was all they could afford, otherwise we'd be on the streets. The house was never finished. It had half-built rooms, piles of construction material everywhere, bare red brick walls with mold and water damage. It was crumbling, much like my parents' relationship and my childhood. My father was violent, unfaithful, and never helped with anything. Then, one night out of nowhere, I woke up to my mum shaking me awake, throwing a jacket over my shoulders and telling me we had to leave. We moved to another city, and stayed with relatives for 2 years before coming back. That's when this story begins. My mum and I moved into a small place, a place my father didn't know. We later found out he'd been asking around the city, trying to find out where we were. And eventually he did. I was still very young, and despite everything, I begged my mum to let me see him. A court ended up granting him visitation rights every other weekend, and for about a year that's what we did. By then, he had a new partner and still lived in that old, decrepit house. I spent weekends there. As awful as the place was, my younger brother also lived there and we were close. My stepmom had a child with Dad while he was still with my mum. My brother is around 3 years younger than me. We'd played in the empty lots, used broken construction materials, rusted furniture and bottle caps as our imaginary theme park. Company and imagination can save a child's life. My father used to tell me he was going to get my mum back. He told me not to let any man get close to her. At the time, I secretly hoped for a happy family too, even though I liked my stepmother. Truth is, he didn't even really take care of me during those visits. I mostly stayed with my brother and his partner because he was completely incapable of caring for a child. Well, one weekend, something strange happened. It was nearly time for him to return me to Mum, but instead of following our usual routine, he suddenly ordered his girlfriend and my brother to leave the house. She began protesting, but he shouted at her until she left without another word. Then he took me down the hill. The house was on a steep hill, a place I'd never been before. We arrived at a woman's house who I didn't recognize. He introduced us, then told me I'd be staying there for a while. But first, the woman handed me a very big glass of chocolate milk, my favorite. She was very nice and smiled warmly as she brought it from the kitchen, and I drank it. Very quickly, I started feeling incredibly sleepy. Everything faded to black. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in my father's house. My mum was there screaming and crying. He stood in front of her, panicking, repeating, "Don't do this, don't do this." She scooped me up like I was still a toddler, carried me outside. It was the middle of the night. The streets were completely empty, but she didn't stop. She carried me all the way to the bus stop and we waited and then we left. Years later, I found out what really happened. He had kidnapped me. Instead of taking me to the designated drop-off location, he brought me to another woman's house, a mistress, and drugged me. He showed up to the meeting point alone and told my mum she'd never see me again unless she agreed to get back together with him, then he walked away. My mum completely lost it. She ran to his house screaming, but he wasn't there, so she waited at the door until he showed up. When he did, she threatened to have the local drug dealers kill him if he didn't take her to where I was, and he believed her. It was late. She was screaming loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear, and he knew she wasn't bluffing. So he went back to the woman's house, got me, brought me home, and that's when I woke up. And that's when I saw her hysterical, terrified, and somehow still strong enough to carry me out of that hell. Dad, let's never meet again. This happened in the autumn of 2012, in Glasgow, Scotland. The air was bitter that evening. Darkness fell early. It was just after 6 p.m. when my two friends, Neelam and Aisha, were closing up the beauty salon where they worked at in the West End. The salon was small but cozy, tucked between aging buildings and a quiet street. It should have just been another routine, packing up, locking the doors and leaving. But what happened next was anything but routine. As Neelam reached to flip the close sign, the front door slammed open so hard it echoed off the walls. They moved like a wave of violence, barreling into the store, their faces obscured by black ski masks. The door banged shut behind them, rattling the glass. They carried blue plastic shopping bags, stretched and bulging with something heavy. Too heavy to be anything good. Neelam froze, her hands still on the sign. Aisha, standing near the counter, felt her stomach drop. Without a word, one of the men kicked the door behind them shut and dragged the metal shutter down with a violent clang, trapping them inside.
"Where is she?"
The voice was deep, guttural, and dripping with menace. The tallest of the men, the one in the middle, then shouted, "Where's the owner?" Neelam and Aisha exchanged a terrified glance. Their boss was never there. She barely showed up. They genuinely had no idea where she was, but the men didn't believe her. "We don't know." Neelam's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. "Don't lie." The man's eyes, barely visible through the ski mask, burned into them. At first, Neelam and Aisha thought these men were just amateurs. Maybe some thugs trying to scare them into giving up the little cash in the till they had, but then they pulled out 3 rusted hammers from the bulging plastic bags, the metal heads gleaming dully in the dim light. One of them held the roll of silver duct tape up in his other hand. "Move." Neelam felt her blood run cold as she was grabbed by the arm. The girls were dragged towards the back of the salon, their shoes scuffing against the floor. Their protests were drowned out by the pounding of their terrified hearts. The back room was small, lined with shelves, hair products, and supplies. The fluorescent lights buzzed above them, casting a sickly, flickering glow. The men forced them into chairs, wheeled chairs, and that's when her stomach dropped. They weren't just going to rob the place. They had a plan. They took the girls' hands and duct-taped them painfully tight, binding their wrists and ankles to their arms and legs of the chairs. The silver tape pressed against their mouths, muffling their terrified whimpers. Neither of them could breathe properly, and Neelam was feeling sick. Her sinuses were clogged from cold, and now the tape sealed her mouth shut, making every breath a struggle. She tried to tell them, tried to beg through the tape, but all that came out were muffled panic sounds. Her glasses slipped from her face as she squirmed, landing somewhere on the floor with a tiny clink, and now she couldn't see either. One of the men told her to shut up, and another one smacked her across the face. Her head snapped to the side, her ears ringing. Aisha was trembling beside her, her eyes filled with terror. She began begging silently for the nightmare to end, but it didn't. The waiting was the worst. The men didn't leave. They stood there pacing, watching. The air grew heavy with each second that passed, and the sound of their heavy boots echoed as they moved back and forth. They weren't just waiting for the owner anymore. They were debating. "We can't leave them. What if they saw too much?" Neelam's breath hitched. They were considering what to do next. The man with the hammer tapped it lightly against his palm, almost absent-mindedly. "No witnesses." Time stretched into an eternity. Neelam's vision blurred from panic, her breath ragged and shallow behind the tape, and her body screamed for air. Aisha's knuckles were white where she gripped the armrest, her lips trembling under the tape. "This is how we die," she thought. Then a noise. Something outside, footsteps, a car door, whatever it was, it spooked the men. "Now let's go." Neelam felt a surge of hope, but it was crushed in an instant. Before leaving, the men smashed everything. Mirrors shattered, the cash register was obliterated, shelves were knocked to the floor. They threw hairdryers, scissors, and styling tools across the room in a frenzy. They didn't take a damn thing. The girls were left tied up, bound, and gagged. They didn't care if they were found. The escape was a nightmare. It took what felt like forever for Aisha to scoot her chair towards the nearest shelf, her arms straining against the tape. Her fingers fumbled, trembling until she finally brushed a pair of scissors. The plastic handle was slick with sweat and shaking hands, but she managed to grip them inch by inch to saw through the tape. Her hands bled where the blades nicked her skin, but she didn't stop. Her hands were finally free, and she ripped the tape from her mouth, gasping for air, then freed Neelam. The girls stumbled to their feet, legs weak and shaking. Neelam's face was pale, her breathing labored, but they made it out. The police came. They asked questions, but ultimately nothing happened. The men were never found. They left the salon immediately after that and never looked back. They never found out what the men wanted or why they came. But they know it wasn't about the money. They wonder if their boss had gotten into something shady and this was a retaliation, or that was a pretense to attack them. They'll never find out. And maybe it's better that way, to try and heal and move on, as they nearly didn't make it out alive. It was a dark and gloomy night in February. It was about 11 p.m. There was no power, as there had been a storm that cut off all the electricity in the region, and as I was sitting there, in the dark, scrolling through my phone, I suddenly realized I wasn't subbed to Mortis Media, and then quickly remedied the situation. Have you? And seriously though, only about 40% of you are actually subbed, so if you enjoy this kind of stuff and would like to keep listening, please press the bell or the sub button. Alright, on to the next story. I want to start this by prefacing that I'm a 21-year-old female, and that I come from a very beautiful but very sketchy place called South Africa. I live with my boyfriend and our 2 dogs. Our neighborhood is considered pretty safe for the most part, and we haven't had any problems so far. So we thought nothing of it when my boyfriend left to go visit his mum for a few days, leaving me alone with the dogs. So yesterday was a nightmare from the moment my eyes opened until I went to bed that night. The night before last, I went to bed after taking my usual chronic medication and painkillers because of a terrible headache. That night, I also started taking melatonin because I have trouble sleeping. About 10 minutes later, I began to feel really ill. I spoke to my aunt who's a nurse, and it turns out that mixing antidepressants, painkillers and melatonin is a very bad combination that can make you very ill, and in severe cases, very dead. Luckily for me, I didn't take a high enough dose of pain meds and melatonin for it to do much except make me feel unwell. I began to feel very lightheaded, and headed to bed. That's where I passed out completely. I woke up the next morning to the sound of a gate opening. I thought it was probably just my parents or brother, since they all have keys and may have forgotten something or wanted to check in. A few minutes went by and I didn't hear anything, so I assumed it was our neighbor's gate, which sounds exactly like ours, or that I might have imagined it, because I was still out of it from the night before. A while later, I heard footsteps walking on the dead leaves on the grass outside, and my dog started freaking out. I figured it must be the stray cat of the neighborhood, or monkey or big bird. I slowly opened the door so to not scare away whatever it was and show the dogs that everything was fine. As I stepped out of my room, I suddenly heard someone trying to open the back patio door, and vividly heard a male voice talking. It was at that point my blood ran ice cold. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife and slowly headed back outside. I looked around the corner and saw a man standing in our backyard by the door. I died on the inside. There was no way I was about to confront this man by myself. I rushed back in, locked myself in my room, and called my mum and dad, who were both 2 hours away. They freaked out and phoned my brother, who was on his way to my parents' place but immediately turned his car around and floored it back to our house. He got there and stormed into the yard. Turns out it was a new gardener my mum hired. He got the times wrong for when he was supposed to come to work, so no one knew he was coming. Our gate was also malfunctioning, so it had opened by itself, so when he arrived and saw the gate open, he assumed it had been left open for him to come in and work. He had been at the back door trying to get my attention so that I could give him the keys to open the shed for the tools. If you think this is the end of the story though, you are quite mistaken. That whole ordeal left me severely freaked out for the rest of the day. I spent some time in my room hanging out with my dogs while the gardener worked outside, and I realized at this point that it was my boyfriend and I's anniversary, and sadly I would be spending it alone. I sent him a cute message and we spoke for a bit, and I decided I wanted to treat myself to some sushi and a milkshake. so I used a food delivery app to order it. I had to order the milkshake and sushi from 2 different places because neither one offered both. The milkshake arrived first and I went outside to grab it. Then I ordered the sushi and waited for it to arrive. A few minutes later, the app notified me the driver was here, so I headed outside. Normally, the driver stops on either side of the road, checked my order, handed me the food and drove off. But this time the driver stopped on the same side of the road as my house and asked me to confirm my name and number. Something which has never happened before. I was too hungry to care, so I didn't think much of it. I walked up to the window to grab the food, but he refused to hand it over and insisted on driving up my driveway, which was the first red flag. I began to feel uncomfortable, but thought maybe I was just being paranoid from the morning's events. Again, I reached for the food and he said no, that he would have to get out and hand it to me. Red flags were screaming at me. He began to make very obvious remarks about my appearance. I took a few steps back and told him to just give me the food because I had something else to do. He stepped into the yard and asked if my dogs were aggressive and if they bit. Thankfully, I've been an avid true crime listener since I was 12, so I told him they were very aggressive and would certainly bite. He took a few steps back, retreating to his car, and I thought I was in the clear. He grabbed a bottle from his seat and asked if I could fill it with water for him. I stupidly took it, went inside and filled it. When I returned, he was walking around my yard, checking to see if I was alone. He made even more creepy comments, including one about how my house must be full of expensive things, since they left such a little beautiful thing to take care of it. My jaw dropped. I was ready to call my dad, but before I could, he got into his car and left. I was extremely freaked out and immediately called my parents. We called our security company and a guard took my statement. He mentioned the creepy incidents and break-ins had been happening a lot lately, and that they would keep a patrol car in the area. That night, my boyfriend and my brother's girlfriend came to stay with me. As we were eating pizza, the alarm outside started blaring. We saw flashlights outside. We grabbed weapons and hid while I pressed the panic button. 6 minutes later, a patrol car arrived, checked the yard, and found that the backyard fence had been tampered with, but no one there. The next day, I had the chilling realization. The creepy delivery guy might be a full-on stalker. I had made 3 orders that day, but my location had been malfunctioning. The first 2 drivers couldn't find me and I had to redirect them, but the creepy guy found me no problem. When I checked my email, my blood ran cold. My sushi delivery had been marked with the wrong address, 3 neighborhoods away. Yet the guy knew how to find where I was, my name and number off by heart. That's not information I should have been able to give to him. I still don't know how he found me, but I've never been more afraid in my life. So to the very creepy delivery driver who made me feel very uncomfortable, stalked me and then tried breaking into my house, I hope we don't meet again. Last year, I moved to a new state for grad school and found a beautiful apartment complex just outside of the city. The area was safe and quiet, and exactly what I needed for my first time living alone. I was excited. It was my first ground floor apartment, and I was finally carving out a space of my own. I wasn't completely alone though. I had my 2 dogs, and they were my little protectors. Every morning like clockwork, I'd take them for a walk around the complex at 7:30 a.m., half an hour of fresh air, and the occasional neighbor giving a polite nod. That was before I met him. It started off innocent. One morning a guy, maybe in his mid-30s, stopped me. "Cute dogs," he said with a friendly smile on his face. He had that overly casual vibe that guys sometimes do when they're trying too hard to seem harmless. "I have a dog too." Nothing out of the ordinary. We had a brief chat, and then I kept walking. I didn't think too much of it. People stopped to pet my dog all the time. but then he showed up again. The next morning, as I was letting my dogs play in the grassy area in front of my building after our walk, he appeared out of nowhere again. This time he didn't say hi. He just picked up one of my dogs. My stomach dropped. Anyone who has dogs knows it's not a good idea to do that. She doesn't like being picked up, I say quickly, forcing a polite but firm smile. Oh, it's fine, he laughed, brushing off my concern. I'm a dog daddy. My dogs are dumbass though, not as cute as these two. His tone was joking, but something about the way he said it made me feel uncomfortable. Then he asked what I did for work, and casually mentioned he just started working maintenance at the complex. Maintenance. That meant he had keys. The next morning he was waiting right outside my apartment. This was too much. He was standing near my door like he just happened to be there. His smile was wide now. You look like you're in good shape. I felt my skin crawl. If you ever want to go running, I'm usually out early. We could do a lap or two around the complex. His tone was dripping with that fake confidence some guys use when they're trying to assert control. No thanks, I replied quickly, forcing a polite smile. My boyfriend and I hike a lot, so I'm good on exercise. I lied. I didn't have a boyfriend. But I knew enough to throw that defense out there, but it didn't work. Well, if you change your mind, I could give you a private session. I was a personal trainer before I got fired. His eyes lingered a little too long, his smile a little too knowing. Then he said something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. If you ever need someone to let your dogs out while you're gone, I've got master keys to all the apartments. After that, I changed my routine. I stopped walking at 7:30. I took different routes, left for work earlier, did everything I could to avoid running into him. For the next few days it worked. I'd peek through the blinds before stepping out, and I'd catch a glimpse of him through trees or just lingering. At first I thought maybe he was just picking up trash like he said, but the longer I watched, the more I realized he was watching my flat or me. I couldn't shake the feeling he knew I was trying to avoid him. 2 weeks passed, and there was no sign of him, which meant I inadvertently let my guard down, which was a big mistake. The morning I decided to resume my normal routine, I stepped outside, and he was standing by my car waiting. My blood ran cold. I didn't know what to do. He'd already seen me. Where have you been? His tone was different this time, less friendly. I forced a laugh, playing it cool. Oh, I just switch up the routine, keep the dogs from getting bored. Liar. I know you weren't here. My heart stopped. Your car wasn't in the lot. I felt like I was going to be sick. I never told him which car was mine. I never parked near him. I never even saw him anywhere near the parking area. I got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't walk my dogs for a month after that. Instead, I brought security cameras and set my alarm religiously. Every time I stepped outside, I peeked around the corner first, heart pounding, terrified I'd see him. I thought about going to the apartment management, but I didn't even know his real name. A 30-year-old white dude wasn't exactly a solid lead. And that was the last time. Then he vanished, just gone. But I never shook that feeling. The feeling of being watched, of someone knowing too much about your life. Even now I'm more cautious. I lock my doors, double-check the windows, and keep my security camera notifications on. Because I'm scared he'll come back. I work at a big retail store as a self-checkout host. Most of my days are spent walking laps and listening to customers say things like, "I don't work here," or "Why aren't you on the register?" I understood their frustrations. Usually there would be 2 or 3 of us at the self-checkout and maybe 2 manned registers open. We got a new guy in called Terry. Terry always wore a mask, as it was 2021 and COVID was still happening. I was training him. telling him to stock candy and bags. He would ask questions anyone would ask. If I'm in school, if I have a girlfriend. I lived in a small city/big town that had a good college. Students from all over the country would come and would usually end up in retail. I asked the same questions back. I told him no on both accounts. He then asked if I ever went hunting. We had a lot of woods and big forests around the town. No, I don't like guns. He said he'd have to take me one day. A few days go by, and he's over on my side again. He asks if I have family in town, and if they didn't, do they live close? I lived 3 doors down from my mum. He starts talking about hunting again, how he was out with his buddies and started using pack tactics, where they would box in the prey and finish it off. Weird for deer, seeing as they flee at the first thought of noise. He's off for a few days because new hires have problems getting hours for the first 3 weeks. And I talked to one of my co-workers, and they tell me he asks a lot about me. The next time I see him, his questions are very telling. How tall would you say you are? How much do you weigh? How well do you know the woods past so-and-so street? I'm a pretty big guy, 6 foot and 300 pounds, and when he brought up hunting again, a creepy thought sent a chill down my spine. Come on, man, you'd like it. Just some good old boys chatting late in the night in the middle of the woods. Then the real fun starts right before dawn. They won't know what hit him. The mask hid most of his face, but I could see it rise when he smiled. I don't know why he thought that would be a great way to convince someone, other than feeling like they were about to hunt me. It sounded like I would have been bored as hell before. I must have made a face or something because he turned and walked away quickly. I told a few co-workers about it, but it turned out that was his last day and I never saw him again. I never found out why he quit, or why he was so insistent on getting me to join him on a hunt. Many people might not believe this, but deep down, I believe. He was trying to lure me out into the woods, scoping out the information to see how much I knew about the area, and then his true intention was to hunt me. Maybe he had something much darker on his mind. Guess I'll never find out, and honestly I'm glad I don't have to. My girlfriend and I love to take late night walks. We decided to go to this beachy area near my house in the Netherlands. It's not a beach at sea, just a large lake with a beach next to it. I love to go to this spot to have fun with my friends, and it's a very common place for people from my city to swim there in the summer. There's a bar and a terrace where you can order food and drinks and everything. Normally it's a very chill spot. That's what I thought until today. It was around 10:30, and we just watched a movie. As I said, we love to take walks, so we did that after. First you have to walk through a small bit of forest, but nothing scary, just a normal asphalt road here and there with a small cabin where people live. As we approach the beachy part, we sit on a bench and just chill there for a while. We stand up again and walk further along the water. We take a right and walk again. In a radius of about 200 meters from every part of the beach is a large forest. We were just walking and walked past a few tents along the way, as people love to go camping there. As we approached the end of the beach, we suddenly hear a loud, manly scream and cry coming from the distance. It sounded as someone who was having a proper mental breakdown. As a normal reaction, my girlfriend doesn't like it much, and neither did I. We took a 180-degree turn and walked straight back. Every 5 to 10 seconds or so, we heard the manly cry and screaming, which echoed over the entire lake. About 500 meters from where we first heard it. We figured we were far away enough and went to sit on a bench again. Suddenly, we heard it again, louder this time. It was coming closer. The screams and cries kept on coming closer to where we were sitting, so naturally we took a run for it, towards the long asphalt road again. In between the beach and the forest is a large open field. As we stop running and start walking normally, the crying becomes fainter as we're moving further away. But every time we stop, it keeps coming closer again. We figured it was walking the same road as we were. As we walk faster and faster back home, I take one last look back, and I see this tall, clothed, black figure stumbling out of the shrubs and small trees along the road. The screaming and crying was something I'd never heard before, and I've never actually seen or heard anyone produce that type or that much sound. Only something you'd hear in a horror movie. The figure then stopped walking and just stood in the middle of the field, still crying. We sprint as fast as we can back to my house. Once we enter the more populated area, we see a man cycling towards us, going in the direction of where we just came from. I decided to inform him about what we saw and heard. He too responded by turning around and going back the other way. It's now 2.5 hours after, and I can't get the sound out of my head. I don't know who it was or why it was doing that noise, but I didn't want to take the risk and find out. This happened when I was in 5th grade, in the year 2023. I was a normal 5th grade boy. For context, I live in Kyrgyzstan, and our school system is different from the one in the States. I had the first shift, which meant school ran from 8 AM to 1 PM. I was the kind of kid who always walked straight home after school, and usually with my 2 best friends since we all lived near each other. When we reached the point where we had to split and go in different directions, we said goodbye and went our separate ways. It was autumn, and I was wearing my school uniform, along with a jacket and a hat, as it was pretty chilly outside. Our apartment building had 7 entrances. Mine was the 7th. I lived in a nice neighborhood right in the center of town. As I got closer to the 7th entrance, I noticed a man standing by the door, specifically on the porch. The moment I looked at him, I got this strong gut feeling telling me not to enter the building while he was there. He stared at me with these empty eyes, and I felt a little scared. Then he turned his head towards me, looked directly at me, and entered the building. My mum had always told me not to go inside the building with strangers, so I stayed outside on the porch, trying to listen and figure out if he took the elevator. Once I heard the elevator go up, I went inside, and thank God no one was there. I pressed the elevator button, waited, stepped in, and hit the button for the 8th floor. As the elevator was going up, I suddenly heard fast footsteps on the stairs. The staircase was close to the elevator, so you could easily hear anyone going up. It sounded like someone was running. Now I was panicking. I didn't know what to do. I was sure it was him. He was coming for me. As the elevator doors opened, I started banging on my apartment door, pressing the doorbell frantically. Unfortunately, my older brother was always slow to answer. I waited, terrified. Then I looked towards the staircase and I saw him. That man was running full speed, looking straight at me. He was so tall and was skipping 3 steps at a time. I was scared out of my mind. I kept banging on the door while he kept running towards me, still staring. Finally, my brother opened the door, but it didn't end there. I rushed inside, slammed the door shut, and told my brother everything. Just so that you're aware, I'm familiar with every neighbor here, and I'd never seen this man before, and he looked kind of unkempt. My brother, who was 16 at the time, and also a wrestler, opened the door again and went out to confront the man. He asked who he was and what he was doing there. The man immediately became aggressive. He pulled out his phone and started pretending to talk to someone. He was rude, angry and aggressive, but my brother stayed calm, just asked questions and told the man he was scaring the residents, but the man didn't care. My brother finally shut the door quickly and told me to be more careful, and honestly, I'm still scared to enter the building because of what happened that day. When I was in 7th grade, I used to walk home from school. The walk was about a mile, and I usually had a group of friends I would walk with. For some reason, my friends were not available to walk home, so I started walking alone. This was in 2007, so cell phones were not really given to kids yet. I was halfway home, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I felt like I was being watched by someone. I was so scared. I looked behind me, and there was a red sedan slowly creeping up behind me. The car pulls up and is moving at my walking speed. There are two men in the car. The man driving was white and about 40. The man in the passenger seat was Hispanic and in his late 20s. The younger man asked me how old I was. I didn't look or respond, I just kept walking. He asked me again, and I didn't look or reply and began walking faster. He asked me to look at him, but I wouldn't. Then he coldly said, "Look at me and I'll tell you how old you are." I was so afraid I just kept walking faster. Then he began screaming at me to get in the car. And I heard his door slowly open and I started running. I didn't look back, and I ran all the way home. I don't know why they didn't continue to come after me. Maybe a passerby spooked them. I told my mum and she didn't really believe me, but said she would take me and pick me up from school from then on. I'm so thankful that nothing came from that experience, but I know I was close to being abducted that day. I was about 15 or 16, and my older brother that went to the same high school as me would drive us to school most days of the week, when our parents stopped wanting to get up early since we both had that zero period that began at 7 a.m. One day on the way to school, we stopped at a donut shop. It was in a sort of remote part of town on a stretch of highway. It was still sort of dark outside. This is just before 6:30 a.m., and it was the late 90s or early 2000s, before it was common teenagers had their own mobile phones, so I didn't have a way to call or text anyone. The shop had nothing around except trees and a stretch of empty land. The parking lot was too big for how small this place was. He didn't park us in the very front spot by the door. To this day I have no idea why he didn't. He parked a few rows and a half from the front and walked in. No one was at the counter, so I watched him wait for service. While he was waiting, my eyes meandered and panned suddenly to a man's face, staring daggers at me from one of the tables at the shop. It was very startling, like in the movies, when they look through binoculars and see someone staring at them through the scope. I immediately looked away because it freaked me out. At first, I thought maybe the man was tired and just kind of spaced out because of how early it was. But I still felt those eyes on me after a few minutes, and although I fought myself to look up, I glanced up, and he wore a creepy smile. He had short, bobbed hair like a dude would have in his 70s. I looked at my brother, and it felt like an eternity as he selected the donuts. He had turned around once, and I tried to get his attention, but he turned back to keep choosing. When my brother was talking to the cashier, I noticed the man at the table getting up. Mind you, he never took his eyes off me. And I remember my heart beating hard in my chest as I looked down, since I couldn't think of anything else to do. I hoped he would just walk away. But out of the corner of my eye, I noticed he was approaching the truck. My first thought was to reach over and honk the horn as loud as I could. But he was already about one stride away from the driver's side, and I had then noticed the door hadn't auto-locked. It was the sort that had the little pop-up button lock. I only had seconds to choose to lock the door or honk the horn, so I practically leapt over and remember slapping down the lock button. Not, but 2 or 3 seconds later, he pulled on the door hard. He turned to walk away, but then started again and tried to pull harder. I then honked the horn to get attention, and I saw my brother had walked to the other side of the counter to view it all. I honked a second time and the guy walked off past the car, across the street where it was a bit wooded before the highway resumed. When my brother came back, he asked why I was honking and being impatient because it was still early, and we wouldn't be late. After I told him some creep tried to get in, he drove around the area, but no one was around since it had been about 5 minutes until he actually made it to the car. It's probably one of the worst experiences of my life, and I wonder what the hell he wanted with me, and what he would have done to me had he got into the car. I'm glad I didn't have to find out. My old middle school does this thing called Candygram. You pay for a note and a candy to be delivered to a friend. This was usually during the holidays or fundraising season. And overall, I never really got one. Yeah, I had plenty of friends, but what kind of middle schooler is going to pay $5 for that kind of stuff? Halloween 2022, I was in my first class of the day, advisory, and like every other year, they were passing out the candygrams. Imagine my surprise when one was given to me. I initially assumed it was from my best friend, and that he just wrote something stupid. Nope. Instead, it just said, "You're cute, love, Anonymous." I was elated. Nobody had ever much interest in me at that point. And the thought of someone going out of their way and spending money on me was very flattering. I showed my friends in advisory and then moved on to the next class. Except this time, someone knows who Anonymous might be. They say this girl in their advisory has a massive crush on me, but they won't tell me who. After a bunch of guessing, I settled on one person, Trisha. And she is a friend of a friend. Up to that point, I had only spoken to her once during a gym period, and I had to be reminded of what she even looked like. The day goes on, and we have a Halloween assembly. Everything is normal. On my way out of the gym, I look behind me to see if any of my friends are nearby, and lo and behold, Trisha is standing behind me. The reason I remember this so vividly is because she slipped on a purge mask as soon as we made eye contact. I sound like a bad horror author, but I kid you not, it's what happened. Needless to say, I ran away and did some legendary trick-or-treating that night. The next day, I opened my locker to a pink, folded-up piece of construction paper. It's a poem. Roses are red, violets are blue. You are for me, and I love you. Secret lover. I'm looking at this, and I run all over to my friend, and we both bend over laughing. The next weeks, I have about 2 notes in my locker every day, but here are the worst. I watch you at your house. I can imagine how our house would look like when we're married. Your feet probably smell amazing. Hi, it's me. Have a nice day. Stalker. These are all word for word, and I'm starting to pile them up right now. She keeps switching signs off to either the Watcher, Secret Lover, Anonymous, or Stalker. And why would you call yourself a stalker? Most of the time, my friends would see her slip notes into my locker during the passing periods, and once I even saw her do it myself. In about a week, all my friends knew every detail of the fiasco, and they found it pretty funny. Honestly, I did too. Remember that friend of a friend? Well, she and I are very close, and she lives within 5 minutes walking distance from my house. She said when her and Trisha were hanging out, she kept bringing me up and asking questions about my family. Then she asked if my friend would show her my house. My friend insisted that she wouldn't, but Trisha was persistent, and no matter how many times she said no, Trisha would ask and ask. My friend never did tell her my address, and she kicked Trisha out of her house. That same friend added me to a Google document that Trisha's friend group used to talk about throughout the school day, and every single thing was about me. What I was wearing that day, who I was walking with, how Trisha and I would make such a good couple. Trisha even wrote down my mum's license plate numbers in the docs. I wish I had a screenshot, but I don't have that device anymore. Mind you, I was 12 at the time this was happening, so I was very stupid, and made my presence known in the doc. I don't exactly remember what I said, but it was something along the lines of, "What the hell?" I add my best friend to the document, and he starts putting on a performance claiming that we're a couple and Trisha needs to back off. Trisha says she's sorry, and it's all quiet for a few days. I go back to the doc to see if anything else has happened, but now it's just Trisha and I in it. She tells this story of how she was up all night crying, writing an apology, and how she threw it in the fire. I have no clue why she felt the need to share all of this. Now I decide I was going to the counselor. I'm sad to admit that up to that point I thought it was all really entertaining, but something about her burning things messed with me. After I tell her this whole tale to the counselor, Trisha gets pulled out of class. But guess what? They didn't delete the document. I'm still baffled how all she got was a reprimand, but still was left with a way to communicate with me. She said a bunch of weird stuff that I've blocked out at this point, but I remember her saying that when they said my name during her getting in trouble, she had a huge pit in her stomach. Needless to say, I removed myself from the dock and didn't give her any more attention. Mind you, throughout the whole thing, I had never spoken to her in person. She continued to stare at me during lunch for the rest of the year and asked people strange questions about me, but thankfully that stopped now that we're in high school. I occasionally see her in the halls, and I just walk by her as quickly as possible. I hope she's grown out of it, and grown up a little, because her behavior was super weird. Back around 1991, I was 20, and newly single from my first love, unemployed, and living with 2 friends. I started hanging out with one of my friend's church friends, kind of like the street church people, no denomination, basic Christian beliefs, but nothing crazy at all. There were around 5 of them sharing a pretty big apartment, and we'd all hang out there, and many people would drop by. Then, this one girl, Bernice, dropped by one day. A very polite girl, by the way, around 7 to 8 years older than I was, and when you're 20 that can seem like a pretty significant difference in my opinion. But whatever, irrelevant I suppose. Although she was pretty, I just wasn't into her immediately. Once she first saw me in the apartment though, she would not stop staring at me the entire time she was there, and she was really obvious about it, and everyone at the apartment could tell she was acting really creepy. Everyone was kind of looking at her and noticing that she was very fixated, and then I remember them trying to talk to her to get her out of this trance, but she would barely acknowledge anyone else talking to her. There was so much tension for the hour and a half she was there. I was new among the group, and a shy person in general, so I didn't want to come out and ask what the hell was going on, as I'm sure many other people would have. So I stayed in my corner and kept watching TV and tried to not look in her direction. Then, once she finally left and could breathe again, they eventually admitted to me that she had a few psychological problems. After this revelation, her behavior made a smidge more sense, but it didn't point to what this all had to do with her fixation towards me that night. Maybe it was because I was the new guy in the group, and she wasn't used to seeing anyone new? Who knows? Regardless, it was disturbing and made me anxious about seeing her again. So about a week later I drop in, and everyone there is staring at me when I walk through the door. "What's going on?" I ask. "Bernice was here today." "And?" "She left a letter. She wrote it for you." She had written 2 or 3 pages to me, which she'd left on a table for anyone else to see and read if they wanted to. That's why they were all freaked out. What they told me wasn't good. Basically, from what I recall, she started quite rambling about when she first saw me she thought I was Jesus, and goes on to say things about it like, "I'm not 100% sure if you are or not, but I think you are. I love you, I can't stop thinking about you, let's get together, etc, etc, you get the idea." I almost defecated myself halfway through reading this thing, and everyone there is just in suspense as they're watching me read it. Once I was done, I was probably about as pale as a ghost. I seem to remember them telling me not to worry about it too much, and that they would make sure she would not come around, in a nice way mind you, especially if I was there. Then, being in a relatively small town about a year or later, I bump into her at a club. It was about 2 to 3 days before Christmas, and I said hello to be polite because she came right up to me. My heart was in my throat, and I imagine I probably started sweating profusely in that instant. I remember her talking to me kind of normal for a few minutes, normal chit-chat about how I was and stuff. So I thought, okay, perhaps she came to her senses a little. I let my guard down and began to relax. Within 5 minutes of conversation though, she drops a bomb and invites me for Christmas supper at her mother's house, with just her mother and herself. This might sound like an innocent and possibly nice thing to do under normal circumstances, but these were not those circumstances. This was way too much. I was out pretty quick. True story. Yesterday, I took my mum on a short vacation to a small coastal town a few hours from home. She's been battling cancer for years, chemos, surgeries, endless hospital visits, and I just wanted her to see the ocean again before I moved abroad. She was exhausted from the trip and went to bed early at our guest house. I, however, couldn't sleep. My head was a mess from a recent breakup, and I had too much restless energy, so I decided to take a walk by the harbour. The town was quiet, just a few locals smoking by the water, and the sound of waves slapping the rocks. The sky was a dark red, fading to purple, and the salty air was pleasant. I turned down a narrow alley that ran alongside a canal. Oak trees arched overhead, their branches forming a tunnel. It was beautiful. The sound of my footsteps seemed swallowed up, and I caught myself glancing over my shoulder more than once, quite sure that someone was walking just behind me. That was when a guy stepped out from the shadows. He was mid-20s, buzz cut, wearing a hoodie. He looked rough but not threatening. He asked if I had the time, said his phone had died, and I almost brushed him off, but I'm not great at saying no. So I pulled out my own phone and showed him the screen. He saw my earbuds and joked about me hiding a phone after all. I didn't really get it. I ended up asking him for a cigarette, and he offered me one from his torn backpack. We sat on a bench under the trees and began talking. He told me he'd been clean from heroin for almost a year, that his father was dying and that he was trying to start over. His voice was gentle. He handed me a beer from his bag and I stupidly accepted it. One beer turned to two, and before long I agreed to walk with him to the gas station for more. On the way, he said he needed to stop by his apartment to grab his wallet. We had to kick the door open because he didn't have a key. His place was horrifying. A one-room dump with an air mattress, piles of beer cans and garbage everywhere. No kitchen, just a broken microwave on the floor and dishes in the shower. The whole place reeked of mold. While he was looking for cash, I noticed his TV was still on, looping the BioShock start screen. I couldn't tell why, but the sound of that low, eerie music made my skin crawl. I should have left then, but I didn't. We grabbed more beer and went to sit by the docks again, and that's when his friends showed up. The first one I noticed was a huge man in his 40s, with a shaved head and old tattoos covering his arms and neck. He wore camo pants and a ripped Pantera shirt. He had a massive black dog on a chain that wouldn't stop staring at me. The second guy was younger, with a ponytail, same camo pants but a Slayer shirt. His eyes were cold and calculating, like he was already sizing me up. They both knew Buzzcut. We drank together for a while, and the conversation got weird fast. They started telling me local stories about people vanishing near the water, bodies found days later mangled by the sea. I laughed nervously, thinking they were messing with me. But then the older one, the tattooed guy, mentioned being part of a club. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. Turns out it wasn't a club. It was a neo-Nazi group. And I don't exactly fit in with that crowd. Olive skin, curly hair, Middle Eastern features. When I hesitated, the older man grinned and said, "It's fine, I've got a black girlfriend." I should have walked away then. Instead, Buzzcut convinced me to go back with them to drop off the empties just for a minute. The second we got inside their place, everything changed. The joking stopped, the tone shifted completely, and they started throwing around questions in a way that didn't sound like jokes anymore. "You said you were cool? We're just hanging out, right? You're not a cop, are you?" I tried to laugh it off, but my hands were shaking, and that's when I saw the gun on the wall. A small machine pistol, not a toy. I asked if it was real, and Ponytail Guy grinned at me. When I told them I needed to go check on my mum, Ponytail said something that froze me completely. "It's cool. I didn't show him nothing." The tattoo guy turns slowly and asks, "What did you see?" My mouth went dry. "Nothing. I didn't see anything." They asked me again if I was a cop. The tattoo guy leaned forward, his voice low. "I don't know if I can let you go." And every instinct in my body screamed to run. Then I heard a toilet flush from the bathroom. He was coming back. I had seconds. I stood up slowly, heart pounding so hard it made my vision blur. The front door was to my left and I didn't think. I yanked it open so hard and slammed it into the dog, who lunged and snapped at my legs, and I ran. Down the street, around corners, through alleys. I didn't stop until I saw the faint yellow light of our guest house. My sandals were half falling off, my stomach twisting in my gut, but I didn't look back once. My mum, bless her, was still asleep when I got in. I packed our bags as soon as the sun came up and got us out of there before breakfast. That was the last night. This morning, I got a call from a private number. No voicemail. I didn't answer. But the sound of the phone ringing made my blood run cold. Because they have my number. And I wonder if they're going to come after me. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you have enjoyed our real horrors. A wide scope there in the level of terror. I genuinely believe the ones where people nearly get kidnapped are by far the ones that are most profoundly chilling, at least to me. If there's a story that you would like to share, feel free to send it to my email or post it on Reddit, my specific Mortis Media Reddit, that is, and it might make its way into a video very soon. Just a gentle reminder, if you guys do want your birthday shoutouts for October, go to Patreon and follow the links. And yeah, let's make it happen, because I am doing the topics. I'm trying to find all the topics for this month, so you know, you don't want to miss it. I will be back tomorrow with another video, Cabins, because it came in second. So yeah, we're gonna start off to October strong, even though we've already started. But yeah, we're gonna be having a lot of content this month. So please tune in frequently. Tell me which topics you want, and I'm gonna try and make it happen. Stay awesome, guys. Hope to see you in the next one. Good night.